The courtroom was eerily still, the weight of anticipation hanging like smoke in the air. The judge, her gavel poised in her hand, surveyed the room with a knowing gaze. As the defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, the prosecutor stepped forward, the silence now suffocating. His voice broke through the stillness. "Your Honor, the defense is not ready for what comes next." The words hung heavy, each syllable a dangerous promise. The courtroom collectively held its breath. The prosecutor turned to face the defendant, his voice a deliberate, cutting accusation. "We have a confession that will destroy your case. Everything you thought you knew was a lie." The room exploded into murmurs, but the prosecutor's glare silenced them all. "The truth," he continued, "is that the defendant was never the victim. The true mastermind was someone much closer to this court than anyone could imagine." The defense attorney, pale and sweating, shot a desperate look across the room. A tidal wave of realization washed over them. The case, once clear, was now clouded in uncertainty and betrayal. The defendant stood motionless, eyes wide with shock, unable to process the words. What had once been a straightforward trial was now spiraling into chaos, and no one knew who could be trusted anymore. The judge's gavel slammed down. The verdict had just begun. Only it wasn't what anyone expected. The confession reverberated like a tidal wave, crashing over everyone in the courtroom. But it wasn't the only truth hidden beneath the surface. The defense attorney, feeling the weight of the betrayal, looked toward his former ally with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You've been hiding this from me all along," he said, his voice shaking. "All this time you knew the truth, and you let us fight a losing battle." The ally remained silent for a moment, guilt and something else, regret perhaps, swirling in his eyes. Then he spoke in a low voice. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." The words hung heavy, and the defense attorney's chest tightened. "We're in this together, or we were," he responded. "But now, you've just destroyed everything." "No." "What do you howl?" The tension between the defense attorney and his former ally reached a breaking point. Late that night, the two met in a small abandoned office. The air was thick with unresolved conflict. "You get it, do you?" the defense attorney asked, voice rising. "This isn't just a case anymore. This is about trust. And you," he shook his head, "you betrayed that." His ally stared out the window, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. He didn't respond right away, as though trying to find the right words. "I never meant for it to go this far," the ally muttered, voice tinged with guilt. "But it's too late now. We're all in too deep." The defense attorney slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing through the empty room. "You've just given up. You've let them win." The words stung, but the ally's expression remained unreadable. The weight of the situation was unbearable. The defense attorney could feel the walls closing in. The case wasn't just falling apart, it was being sabotaged from within. "I trusted you," he whispered, turning away. But the ally didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The search for the missing witness had begun in earnest. The defense team scattered, calling every contact they had, checking every lead. But it seemed like the witness had vanished without a trace. "This is bad," the lead investigator muttered into the phone, looking around the dim-lit office filled with papers and folders. "We've checked every possible location. No sign of him." The defense attorney rubbed his temples, the frustration mounting. The clock was ticking, and without the witness, their case was as good as dead. He paced the room, thinking through every conversation, every clue that had led them to this point. "He's out there. He has to be," the defense attorney said, his voice tight with determination. "Find him. We need him." The investigator nodded, but there was an unmistakable doubt in his eyes. If he's been silenced, it might already be too late. Just as hope seemed lost, a breakthrough came. The missing witness had been found, but there was something off about the situation. The defense attorney arrived at an old deserted warehouse where the witness had been located. The moment he walked inside, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A figure, shrouded in darkness, stood in the corner of the room. The witness was trembling, But before he could speak, the figure stepped forward, blocking the exit. "You talk, and you're dead," the figure growled, his voice low and menacing. The defense attorney's eyes locked with the witness, pleading for an answer, but the man could only shake his head. Fear had taken hold. The defense attorney felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. There was no way out now. The game had changed, and the stakes had been raised. The defense attorney stood in the dimly lit office, staring at the photograph in disbelief. It was an old photo, yellowed with age, but the details were unmistakable. The man standing beside the defendant in the image was someone he trusted, someone he never imagined would be involved. The photograph taken years ago captured a secret meeting between the defendant and the prosecutor, both laughing in a moment of camaraderie. It made no sense. Why would they be together so comfortably when the defendant's life was on the line? He tried to steady his breath, but his heart raced as the implications of the photo began to sink in. What if the prosecutor had been involved all along? The defense attorney had spent weeks building a case based on trust, but now that trust was shattered. The image felt like a bullet to the chest, and with it came the cold realization that the entire case was built on lies. He quickly called his investigator, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig deeper. We've missed something big. The truth is far darker than we thought." The defense attorney stormed into the prosecutor's office, the photograph clutched tightly in his hand. He threw it down on the desk, his eyes burning with fury. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. The prosecutor, leaning back in his chair with a cold smirk, glanced at the photo and then looked back at him with an icy calm. "You think you've discovered something?" the prosecutor said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "It's too late for that." The defense attorney's heart raced. This wasn't the confrontation he had imagined. There was no guilt in the prosecutor's eyes, only a strange sense of control. "You knew," the defense attorney said, his voice hoarse. "You knew all along, didn't you? This whole time you were in on it." The prosecutor leaned forward, his fingers steepling as he regarded the defense attorney with a calculating gaze. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'd suggest you be careful. You're treading dangerous waters now." The words hung in the air, and the defense attorney realized he was no longer just fighting for a case. He was fighting for his life. The defense attorney's frustration mounted as the investigation into the prosecutor's involvement deepened. Late nights were spent scouring old records, tracking down witnesses, and piecing together a puzzle that didn't seem to fit. "There has to be something we're missing," he muttered, running his hand through his hair. He leaned over a large map spread across the table, pushing red pins into locations that seemed to be connected to the prosecutor's past. His team was scattered across the city, following leads that all seemed to circle back to one central point, an old case that had long been buried. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that the prosecutor was involved in something far larger than anyone had imagined. Every new piece of information felt like a step closer to uncovering the truth, but also a step deeper into a labyrinth of corruption and deceit. "This isn't just about the defendant anymore," the defense attorney said, his voice grim. "This is about exposing everything." The defense attorney sat in the darkened office, staring at the files in front of him, his mind racing. It had all come down to this. The missing witness had been found, but they had disappeared once again, vanishing without a trace. Desperation gnawed at him. If he couldn't find the witness, the entire case would collapse. "We're running out of time," he said to himself, the weight of his words sinking in. His phone buzzed on the table, and he answered it without looking. "What?" he snapped, irritation lacing his tone. "The witness is dead," came the voice on the other end. "We couldn't get to him in time." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The defense attorney slumped back in his chair, his face hardening as the realization dawned. They were being watched. They were being manipulated. This wasn't just about one case, it was about an entire network of corruption. He had no choice now but to confront the enemy directly, but doing so would come at a cost. "No more running," he said, his voice cold. "We're going to war." As the defense attorney prepared for the final push, everything had changed. He had found the missing piece of the puzzle, the key witness, the one person who could turn the tide. But as he stood outside the courthouse, the weight of what he had learned hit him. "This is it," he muttered to himself. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. He had no idea who was working with him or against him. As he stepped inside, the doors to the courtroom felt heavier than ever. He knew the stakes had never been higher, and as he faced the judge and prosecutor once again, his heart pounded in his chest. This is the moment that will define everything, he thought, taking a deep breath. His eyes locked with the prosecutors across the room. The final confrontation was about to begin. Let's see who's really been playing who. The defense attorney stared at the file in front of him, his fingers trembling as he opened it. Inside were details that made his stomach churn. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered. Every piece of evidence led him to a single horrifying conclusion. This wasn't just a case about one man. It was part of a much larger conspiracy. The prosecutor, once an adversary he respected, was merely a cog in the machine. "This goes all the way to the top," the defense attorney muttered to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. The documents outlined bribes, manipulated testimonies, and the quiet destruction of anyone who dared stand in the way. This was no longer about a courtroom victory. It was about exposing a network of power that stretched far beyond the legal system. The more he read, the more the faces in the documents blurred into one, connected by a web of deceit. "Who else is involved?" he whispered, his voice filled with both fear and determination. He had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The defense attorney knew he needed help, but who could he trust? His thoughts turned to an unlikely ally, Detective Foster, a man with a reputation for playing by his own rules. The detective had his own agenda, but the two had a history of working together when things got dirty. The defense attorney called him, and after a brief conversation, they arranged to meet at a quiet cafe late at night. Foster, in his mid-40s with graying hair and a weathered face, slid into the booth across from him. "I'm not doing this for you," Foster said, his voice rough, his eyes scanning the street outside. "I'm doing this because I want to bring them down just as much as you do." The defense attorney nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. They were both on the same side, whether they liked it or not. "We're in deeper than we thought," the defense attorney said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't expose this now, there won't be anyone left to stop them." Foster's expression hardened. "Then let's burn it all down." The alliance was formed, and with it, the stakes became even higher. With the help of Detective Foster, the defense attorney gained access to a hidden network of individuals, informants, insiders, and those who had been silenced. Each piece of information he uncovered confirmed his worst fears. The conspiracy ran deeper than he had imagined, stretching to the highest echelons of power. The defense attorney met with one such informant in a dark alley, the figure nervous and shaking, glancing over their shoulder. "You're in way over your head," the informant warned, their voice trembling. "These people, they don't stop. If you keep digging, they'll bury you." The defense attorney stared at the informant, the weight of their words sinking in. "I'm not backing down," he replied, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. "I'll take them down, one by one." The informant nodded, pressing a small envelope into his hand, before disappearing into the night. Inside the envelope were more names, names that would bring the conspiracy crumbling to the ground, or lead the defense attorney straight into their trap. There was no turning back now. The more the defense attorney uncovered, the more his trust in everyone around him began to crack. His own team, the ones he'd trusted with everything, had their own secrets. It started with a phone call in the middle of the night. "We need to talk," the voice on the other end said. It was one of his team members, someone he thought was loyal. They met in an underground parking garage where the truth came out. "I didn't want to do this, but I'm out. You've crossed a line that can't be undone," the team member said, their face shadowed in the dim light. The defense attorney was stunned. "You're working for them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The team member nodded, their eyes filled with regret. I didn't have a choice. They have too much on me. The words cut deep, but the defense attorney knew there was no time to mourn the betrayal. You'll regret this, he said, his voice cold and filled with fury. I'll take them down no matter what. The team member turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the defense attorney alone in the garage, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. The defense attorney had reached the point of no return. With the conspiracy exposed, with his allies turned enemies, and with the world closing in, there was only one final choice left: expose the truth, no matter the cost. The clock was ticking. He gathered his remaining allies, including Detective Foster, in a small dark room. This is it, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. We take them down tomorrow. There's no more hiding, no more waiting. We act or we lose everything. Foster, his face hard and determined, nodded. I'm with you, no matter what. As the defense attorney looked around at his team, he realized they were all in this together, but each of them had their own reasons for joining the fight. Let's finish this, he said, his eyes steely with resolve. The battle had begun, and tomorrow, the truth would finally be unleashed. The plan was set, but the defense attorney knew the risk was monumental. That night, he and Detective Foster infiltrated a secured records facility under the cover of darkness. The cold air bit at their skin as they moved quickly through the alley toward the unmarked door. Foster worked the lock with a calm precision that came from years of skirting the law. We've got 5 minutes before they notice, Foster whispered, pushing the door open. Inside, rows of metal filing cabinets and dusty shelves lined the narrow aisles. The defense attorney's pulse quickened. Every second mattered. They began pulling boxes, scanning documents, and snapping photos. The deeper they searched, the more damning the evidence became. Financial ledgers, falsified reports, signatures that tied powerful names to the conspiracy. Then, the sound of a door clicking shut echoed in the distance. Foster's head snapped up. We're not alone, he said, his voice low. The defense attorney felt the weight of danger settle in. They had come for proof, but now, they had to get out alive. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing down the narrow corridor. Foster motioned for silence, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. The defense attorney's grip tightened on the envelope of stolen documents. We've got what we need. Let's move, Foster muttered, his voice urgent but controlled. They slipped through the shelves, trying to avoid the flashlight beams cutting through the dark. A security guard's voice called out, "Who's there?" Panic threatened to break the attorney's focus, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The back door was only 20 feet away when the beam of light found them. Stop! The guard lunged forward, and Foster shoved the attorney through the door, slamming it shut behind them. They burst into the cold night air, hearts racing. Sirens wailed in the distance. Foster smirked, breathless. Guess we just made the guest list. At a deserted train station before dawn, the defense attorney waited for their contact, a journalist willing to take the story public. The platform was empty, except for flickering overhead lights and the distant hum of an arriving freight train. Foster stood watch near the entrance. The journalist appeared from the shadows, a small figure with a determined face. You've got no idea what this will unleash, she said, as he handed over the documents. I'm counting on it, the attorney replied. She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening at the evidence. This isn't just corruption, this is organized crime at the highest level. The train roared past, drowning out their voices. When it faded, the attorney locked eyes with her. Once you start this, there's no going back. She nodded, tucking the documents into her bag. Neither for you. The meeting had been a setup from the start. Hours later, the defense attorney and Foster found themselves surrounded in an abandoned warehouse, the echo of footsteps filling the air. The prosecutor stepped from the shadows, a smug grin on his face. Did you think I wouldn't know? He asked. Behind him, armed men fanned out, their boots crunching on the concrete floor. The attorney's pulse pounded in his ears. You've got nothing left to hide behind, he shot back. The prosecutor chuckled. On the contrary, I've got everything to gain. Foster shifted slightly, his hand hovering near his holster, but the odds were grim. The attorney scanned the room, looking for an opening, realizing too late they were already in checkmate. It happened in a blur. Foster drew first, firing into the air to create chaos. The attorney seized the moment, shoving a nearby crate into one of the gunmen, sending papers and splinters flying. They sprinted for a side door as bullets tore through the air, ricocheting off metal beams. The prosecutor shouted orders, but in the confusion, they slipped into the night. They didn't stop running until they reached the relative safety of the riverfront, lungs burning and adrenaline still flooding their veins. The attorney leaned against a rusted railing, staring out at the dark water. We just declared war, he said, his voice shaking from both fear and resolve. Foster lit a cigarette, the ember flaring in the dark. Good. I've been itching for a fight. The city awoke to chaos as the journalist released the damning files online. The defense attorney stood in front of a flickering TV in his safe house, watching headlines scream with corruption charges and political scandal. Foster paced the room, his phone buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. They'll come after us harder now, he warned, his tone grim. The attorney's eyes stayed fixed on the screen, absorbing the images of protests erupting downtown. The journalist's voice played over the footage. This conspiracy reaches the highest offices in the state. The truth can no longer be contained. The attorney felt the weight of what they had set in motion. It wasn't just about winning a case anymore. It was about surviving the storm they had unleashed. We wanted the world to know, he said quietly. Now they do. By midday, the backlash had begun. Anonymous threats flooded their phones, and unmarked cars began circling the block. Foster checked his gun, muttering, "They're not just trying to scare us, they're preparing to end this." The attorney pulled the blinds tight, heart pounding. Across the street, two men in black suits stood watching from a parked sedan. "We can't stay here," the attorney said, voice sharp with urgency. Foster nodded, already packing the files. "We move now. Keep your head down." As they slipped out the back, the attorney glanced once more at the sedan. The men were still watching, their faces cold and unreadable. Every step away from the safe house felt heavier, each turn a gamble between escape and ambush. They decided to confront the narrative head-on. That evening, the attorney and Foster appeared at a packed press conference. Camera flashes exploded as they took the stage. "We've been targeted because we have the truth," the attorney began, voice steady, but eyes scanning the room for threats. The crowd murmured as he laid out the evidence, names, dates, financial trails, each detail more damning than the last. Foster stood guard at the edge of the stage, scanning for movement. "This ends when they're held accountable," the attorney declared. But as he spoke, he caught sight of a familiar face in the back of the room, the prosecutor smirking. The attorney's stomach tightened. The real fight was only beginning. The press conference ended in chaos. As the attorney and Foster exited through the side door, a black van screeched to a halt beside them. Masked men leapt out, swinging weapons. Foster tackled one, while the attorney scrambled back toward the building. "Go!" Foster shouted, throwing a punch. A masked man grabbed the attorney's arm, twisting hard, but he broke free, shoving his attacker into a wall. The sound of sirens in the distance sent the assailants fleeing, but the damage was done. Foster's face was bloodied, and the attorney's hand throbbed from the struggle. "We're not safe anywhere," the attorney said, breath ragged. Foster spat blood onto the pavement. "Then we stopped running." Hours later, in an abandoned warehouse safehouse, the attorney wrapped Foster's injured hand. "They're not going to stop," the attorney said quietly. Foster's jaw clenched. "Neither are we." They spread the stolen files across a dusty table, marking their next targets. The attorney traced a finger along the names, each one a rung higher in the conspiracy's ladder. "Tomorrow, we hit them where it hurts. Hard and public." Foster lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. "About time we took the fight to them." The attorney met his gaze, their silent agreement sealing their fate. This was no longer defense. This was war. At sunrise, the defense attorney and Foster prepared their counterstrike. They had leaked enough to shake the foundation, but now they aimed to dismantle the conspiracy from its core. The target, a private club where the most influential figures met in secret. They arrived in a battered sedan, parking 2 blocks away, the city still waking. "We go in, we get the recordings, and we get out," Foster said, chambering around. The attorney adjusted the wire hidden beneath his jacket, feeling the cold press of fear and resolve in his chest. They walked toward the club, blending with the early morning foot traffic. Behind its polished doors lay the evidence they needed, and the danger they couldn't avoid. The club's interior was all mahogany and low light, with quiet jazz playing in the background. Wealthy men and women sipped coffee and spoke in hushed tones. The attorney and Foster moved with purpose, avoiding eye contact, heading for the back offices. A waitress offered a polite nod as they passed. In the far corner, a glass door marked private was left slightly ajar. The attorney's heart pounded. Foster pushed it open, revealing a dim office with leather chairs, a liquor cabinet, and most importantly, a small recording console on the desk. "This is it," the attorney whispered. Foster began copying files onto a flash drive, every click of the mouse feeling like a gunshot in the silence. As the flash drive filled, the attorney skimmed through the files. Audio recordings of meetings, voices naming names and discussing payments. The scale of the corruption was staggering. He froze at a familiar voice, the judge presiding over his case, laughing casually about fixing verdicts. His stomach turned. "We have her," he said, voice tight. Foster gave a grim nod, ejecting the drive. Just as they turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Hide it," Foster ordered, slipping the drive into his boot. The office door swung open, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Lost?" he asked, his tone cold. The attorney forced a smile, praying it looked convincing. Foster didn't wait for conversation. He brushed past the man, muttering, "Wrong room." The attorney followed, his pulse hammering in his ears. They moved quickly through the club, but voices rose behind them. Guards had been alerted. Bursting into the street, they merged into the crowd, weaving between pedestrians. A black SUV screeched around the corner, men in suits spilling out. Foster grabbed the attorney's arm. "Run!" They darted into an alley, vaulting over trash bins, the sound of pounding footsteps closing in. At the alley's far end, they leapt into their sedan, Foster slamming the accelerator as bullets cracked against the rear window. Back at the warehouse, they laid out everything. The flash drive, the files, the names. Foster lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly as the attorney replayed the judge's voice. "This will destroy her," the attorney said. "And the rest," Foster added. They began mapping out the next moves, selective leaks to maximize impact, timing releases for maximum exposure, and preparing for the retaliation that would follow. Outside, the city carried on unaware of the storm brewing. The attorney stared at the evidence, knowing the line had been crossed long ago. "We end this," he said, his tone final. Foster nodded once. War wasn't coming. It was already here. The city was restless as dawn broke, a storm brewing in both the skies and the streets. In the warehouse, the defense attorney zipped the final envelope of evidence, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. Foster checked the loaded magazine in his revolver. "This is it. One push, and they fall," he said, his voice carrying both confidence and the gravity of the moment. The attorney looked up, eyes hard. "We deliver it all. Press, feds, everyone at once. No one escapes." The plan was simple but lethal. Simultaneous releases to every channel that could bring the conspiracy down in one crushing blow. They stepped into the cold morning air, the horizon tinged with the red of a rising sun, a warning and a promise. They entered the courthouse not as defenders but as executioners of truth. Every step echoed in the marble hallways as they made their way toward the main chamber. The prosecutor was already there, leaning casually against a table, his smirk betraying his false confidence. "You think a stack of papers will save you?" he sneered. The attorney dropped the envelope onto the judge's bench with a solid thud. "It's not just papers, it's everything," he said, locking eyes with the judge. Gasps rippled through the crowd as reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing. The prosecutor's smirk faltered as Foster stepped closer, his presence like a shadow over the man's arrogance. The judge opened the envelope, her brow furrowing as she flipped through the contents. Audio recordings played on a portable speaker, filling the chamber with voices plotting verdicts and trading favors. Every name mentioned was a nail in the coffin of the powerful. Murmurs turned into gasps, the gallery erupted into chaos. The prosecutor's face drained of color as his own voice echoed back at him. The judge's gavel slammed, but the noise wouldn't stop. It was the sound of reputations shattering in real time. The attorney stood motionless, letting the evidence speak for itself. In that moment, the truth was no longer hidden. It was burning through the room like wildfire. Within hours, news outlets blared headlines. The city's power structure was crumbling. High-ranking officials were led out of offices in handcuffs. And protesters flooded the streets, their chants echoing against glass towers. In the courthouse, the prosecutor sat alone, his head in his hands, the weight of inevitability pressing down. Foster watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. The attorney stepped outside into the cold air, sirens wailing in the distance. "It's over," he said, almost to himself. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew corruption never truly dies. It just hides, waiting for the next moment to rise. That night, the warehouse was silent, except for the hum of a single light bulb. The attorney sat at the metal table, staring at the last unopened file, evidence that could expose another layer of the rot. Foster stood by the door, cigarette smoke curling in the dim light. "We could end it here," Foster said. The attorney didn't look up. "Or we could finish it." He slid the file across the table toward Foster, the decision unspoken but understood. Somewhere in the city, the embers of corruption still glowed, waiting to ignite again. The attorney whispered, "We're not done." And the bulb flickered out, leaving only darkness.